So as I said, today we're going to be discussing the new complaints regime, which will come into force on the 19th of June 2026. So it's getting close. So Jenai is going to take us through the legislation and then the guidance which has been issued by the ICO in relation to the new regime. And then Lisa's going to look at some practical points from having dealt with clients who are putting complaints procedures in place already, and a bit of a scenario to look at handling a complaint. And then I'm just going to wrap up at the end with just a very brief look at some of the guidance which has been updated for the Data Use and Access Act apart from the complaints, and a quick update on the digital omnibus. So just to let you know, if you have questions, there is a Q&A function. So if you click on the Q&A icon at the top, you will be able to raise questions which we can look at the end. Although if you'd rather, you certainly can drop us a message by email, and that's absolutely fine too. Right, I'm going to hand over to Jenai to kick us off.
Thanks, Claire. Brilliant. So I'm going to be covering, as part of this session, a bit of the legislation and guidance, but we do have a poll to start this off because I think it's always nice to have a quick poll. So just be interested to know that has anybody handled a data protection complaint? I know the legislation doesn't come in until June, but it'd be good to know whether or not people have had to handle these already. So it'd be good to see. So if you just want to share your responses. Yeah, as expected. Yes, so 75% of you, or some of you are unsure, not sure. So for those of you that haven't, welcome to the world of data protection complaints. They are confusing at times, but ultimately I wanted to start actually by saying, if nobody has read this book called by Stephen Covey, it's called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the one thing I want you to bear in mind when handling the complaint is really always assume good intent, because that is something that will keep you sane as you do go through some of these. So yeah, so a book recommendation from me and definitely helps. So starting off now then, in relation to complaints, so we know that the right to complain is formally coming into effect on the 19th of June. So what does the right to complain mean? Well, it's pretty simple. I've put as many words on the slide as possible to make it look great. But the first point is that a data subject can make a complaint to the controller regarding the processing, so the use of their personal data, and the complaint can come in many different forms. So there is no specific way that they need to complain. You can't get them to submit a form. You can't get them to use certain language. In fact, they don't even have to mention the word complaint. So it's very similar to the rights of data subject rights that individuals have already, which is why it's key to have training for people, which we will come on to shortly. So individuals have the right to complain. So then if individuals have the right to complain, then you as an organisation that's a controller must have processes in place then to facilitate the handling of those complaints. And they could be things like providing a complaints form, and we'll go through some of the documents that we would recommend. And we have prepared a suite of documents that can be used as standalone or embedded into processes. The complaint, you must be able to handle the complaint if it comes in verbally or via social media or any of those mechanisms. But again, if it comes in via social media in a public channel, please don't respond in a public way unless you want it to be all over the internet. You must tell individuals that they have the right to complain. So that could be facilitated by putting in your privacy notices. And each time you write to the individual, if it is in relation to a complaint, then you must tell them how they can make that complaint. And again, you're using really plain, clear language. Now, most of our privacy policies and privacy notices that we have seen and that we draft, they do have a whole section on complaining to the regulator. So hopefully that will just be a very simple change. So amending the bottom of your privacy notice. And again, the guidance talks about data subject access requests. So when you respond to a data subject access request, you should also give the individual the right to complain or tell them their rights. But I would say that that applies to handling all data subject rights, not just a DSAR right as well. So that, again, is just as simple as letting them know that they can complain if they're not happy with the process to you initially. And then you can say, if you're not happy, then you can also complain to the ICO, and then you also need to let them know that they have the right to judicial review, so they can take the matter further if they're then not happy with the way that the ICO handles the complaint. Lucky ICO. So there's no prescribed way that you can handle a complaint, and you have full autonomy of how you do this, which is great. So you can be as creative as possible, but I would just say, just keep it super simple. You've already got enough on your plate with DPIAs, TIAs, LIAs, and everything else that's going on. So really streamline the process. This does not need to be complicated, and I would caution against having a really complex process to go through. So what is the complaints process? So the requirements are that you have to acknowledge the complaint within 30 days. And then obviously we would recommend adding it to a complaints log. That does not mean you have to respond within the 30 days, but ideally you will start the investigation into the complaint as soon as possible. Now, it may be that you are unable to respond within 30 days because the complaint might be quite complex, and it also may be bundled up with lots of different other issues for the organisation. So I think it's very important that you go back to the individual and let them know you've received their complaint, you're investigating it. If you are able to let them know when you can respond, then do that. But I would very much caution against giving them a deadline that you then don't meet. So don't be in a rush to say we will reply within 30 days. You might not reply within 30 days. So I think it is sufficient to just let them know you've received a complaint, you're taking it seriously, you're investigating it. And then the next step would be then for you to investigate the complaint. And as you're going through that investigation process, where appropriate, because I don't think it's reasonable to give somebody a daily update or a weekly update unless it is quite a severe complaint, in which case then you can do that. But from a practical point of view, carry out the investigation and let the individual know what's happening. Now, if you do have to engage with different teams, really important to work out with them if the complaint is bundled up with lots of other issues, when they're likely to do it as well. So I would say, again, just keeping them informed where possible. If anyone has dealt with complaints before, they are quite difficult, and sometimes you don't even get the chance to even extend an acknowledgement before an individual does respond. So we have seen that on several occasions where multiple emails come in from an individual if they haven't had a response within a day, which from my point of view, and actually from the regulator's point of view, is just it's not acceptable in terms of, you don't have to respond to an email immediately, but just making sure that you let them know what's happening. So when you've carried out your investigation, and Lisa will talk about things that you can do for that when she has her section, is like just thinking about just giving them the outcome to their investigation. So this is really critical as well. And the easiest way to go through this is go through each part of the letter that they've sent you, or the email, or the crux of their complaint. So if they've phoned in, like make sure you're documenting fully their complaint, and maybe in that scenario to make sure you have understood, like email them back, say, I understand your complaint is around this. Can you confirm that that anything's missing, and we will start the investigation. So just making sure that you have responded to each point, because if you don't, it will invite them to come back with further questions. So it's better to just give one response initially, even though they have the right, obviously, to raise further questions. So as part of all this process, I think it's really important to document what you did. So just make sure that you have copies of emails that you have sent to the teams that you might be speaking to, or if it's an isolated complaint, just making sure that you are saving the documents and the emails in one specific area. And that is quite important, because if an individual then does make a further complaint to the regulator, you want to be able to demonstrate how you handled the complaint and also the process. Now, hopefully you will have a complaints process that will go through what you did, so you can also use that as evidence, but just keep an audit trail as well of what you have done. And then after you've handled the complaint, it's always really good to do a look back and go, okay, that was quite interesting. Could we have avoided that happening? What do we need to do from best practice? Was there, even if you don't uphold the complaint, was there anything that we could learn as an organisation going forward to prevent this from happening sooner? The way that I like to do things is to think about the worst case scenario whenever I'm drafting anything, and think what could go wrong, and try to stop that from happening. So just make things explicitly clear when you need to, because I would much rather spend the time up front getting a process done or a privacy notice written than having to deal with a complaint and investigation, because it's very stressful for the individual. It's also quite stressful for the organisation, and takes a lot of time and money. So that's the complaints process. So how do you prepare for the requirements? So as I said, we have prepared a suite of documents, as you may not know, or you probably all do know, we are outsourced DPOs. So we do work with a lot of clients. So for our DPO clients, we've prepared documents that we can work with our DPO clients on, but these can be used by anybody. And again, as we normally draft the documents, they're as simple as we can make them whilst still being able to comply with the legislation. So first things first is you should have a complaints process and a way for individuals to complain. So again, you cannot get them to complete a form, but you could have a form on your website for them to complete. It could be that they could complain via email into an inbox. It could be that they could telephone customer services or a specific phone line. It could be that they could raise a ticket via a chat bot, and that is quite important actually. If it's a chat bot and if it's AI and it's not monitored, you do really need to train your chat bots to think about the words complaint, data protection, and also some other keywords like phrases like, what are you doing with my data? Why are you still contacting me? So really think like really strategically about the kind of phrases that people might have, because to put the word data in will obviously flag loads of queries that are coming in, say, to your ticketing line. So just really thinking about what can you have in place as a control, and again, document that, because then if there is an issue with the regulators and a complaint wasn't picked up, you can say, well, actually, we do have these QA controls in place so to go through as well. And this process will obviously be amazing, but it's not very good if people don't know about it. So tell people about your complaints process. At the end, I think there's a bit of a worry with organisations that if you tell people that they can complain, they will complain. I think people are going to complain no matter what you do. And with AI, they're using AI to make those complaints. So it is better to just have a process. So when something does come in, you are on the forefront or at the forefront and able to handle that as well. So tell them about your complaints process, which, as we've said, put it in your privacy notice. When you're handling any form of like data subject rights, have that in there. Also have a link to your complaints process if you want on your website, so people can have that on there. And we'll talk about what you will do is if you have complaints processes already, because you might be regulated and you might have different ways of handling certain things. We can talk about how you do that. And then how to prepare for the requirements as well. When somebody complains to you, don't forget about the requirement to ensure that you only disclose personal data to authorised people. So you must verify the identity of the individual. Quite often when complaints come in, people miss that. I think with data subject rights, people are very used to the process now of like reviewing the request that's come in and then automatically doing the ID and V. So do we know that we've identified the individual? Do we have enough information to identify them based on what we have already? Or if not, do we need to go out and get some more information? And again, the principle for this is really be reasonable. You cannot make it difficult for individuals to exercise their rights of data subject rights. And it's the same with complaints as well. So what is reasonable? Now, obviously, if you get something via email and the email address is different to the email address that you've been corresponding with the individual, that is absolutely right to go out and verify that email address and just make sure that they are the right individuals. Additionally, if requests are made on behalf of third parties, please do not forget the fact that you still need to verify the authority to make sure that that third party can act for the individual. And that's whether or not it comes from a solicitor, a claims management company, or any other third party. And then additionally, where there are complaints made by children, you have to ensure that the authority's there and that you do have the right to disclose that information. So don't forget, this is the critical one, because I think this is the one where people might get tripped up a bit, where it's another mechanism for somebody to try to blag their way and get that data as well. And then how to prepare for the requirements. I think the biggest thing I would say is just train people on how to recognise a complaint. And it's really critical to do that. And I would also do lessons learned, and I would do check-ins to look at like some complaints that have come in, and definitely QA, because it is really important. Now, with the complaints, the training can be high level for people that just need to know that there is this right to complain. But then you need to really give enhanced training for those people in the teams that are likely to get those complaints as well, to make sure that they really are clued up as well. And I would also recommend that it's really important for people on the board as well. So if they're in the public domain, or people might get their email addresses, So, for example, like the CEO, somebody may get hold of their name, they may find it on LinkedIn. It's really important that people know to forward those to the data protection team or the customer service team or whichever team is handling those as well, to make sure that they can deal with them. So I think the next one is, when is a complaint a complaint? But I'm going to go back just for a minute because we've got another poll here. So I would be super interested if you know the answer to this. So obviously individuals have the right to complain to an organisation. When they've done that, they can complain to the ICO. But how many ICO complaints did they receive in 2024, 2025? So what do you think? How many do you think? It's a big old number up there. Any one of them are. What do we think? Interesting. Okay, anybody else? Great, that's right. Over 42,000 complaints received last year alone from the ICO. And I don't know if people read the responses from the tribunals, but the process that individuals go through is they will complain to you, and if they're not happy, they do obviously have the right to complain to the ICO. The ICO will come to you and ask you how you handled the complaint and what you did. They will then decide whether or not they feel that you've handled the complaint, or it could be a data subject access request, as most of these are, as I read with interest every morning. And then the ICO will issue their outcomes and their findings. And if the individual's not happy, they can then complain to the ICO, and then it goes through, a tribunal. So I found out, I was doing some research into tribunals. Claire and I were having a bit of a conversation about it. So there are 7 different chambers that settle disputes for practical issues of law, practical issues, so things like DSARs. So normally what would happen is, I think it's the first tier regulator tribunal. This is not a whole session on how the tribunals work, but basically the individuals do have the right to go. And a lot of the findings that are coming out have basically said the ICO investigated the complaint. We're satisfied that they reviewed it in accordance with their requirements as a regulator and their obligations, and then they are happy with the response that was issued to the individual. Well, they don't say that, but they were happy that the ICO responded, because they don't look at the response, they look at how it's investigated. And then it says, and the individual's got, has exhausted all of their rights with the ICO as well. So that is the kind of process that it goes through. But individuals obviously do have the right to take that further, and they can issue claims for compensation if they have any merit. So that is something that's worth considering. So the first thing is to really think about is, when is a complaint a complaint? Because not every complaint is a complaint, according like a data protection complaint as well. So an individual might make a request for a data subject access request. That is not a complaint, that is a DSAR that they're making. They may have a grievance to say, the wrapped up in employment related matters about their termination, and they may say, and I would like a DSAR, and I want you to erase all data you hold about me. That is not a complaint, that is a grievance, which would be handled by different teams. Obviously in accordance and working in partnership with the data team or whoever handles data protection. So that wouldn't be a complaint. So it is just always, it's really important to look at the wording now of these complaints that are coming in. So look for the word complaint, look, I'm not happy. So Lisa's got a really good scenario actually where, I think she's going to make you do some, if you were here, we would get you to write, but she's going to have a bit of a conversation with you. So you don't have to use the words complaint. You don't have to quote legislation. That's standard. As data protection professionals, you expect that anyway. So a complaint just could be it could be about a DSAR. So they could say, I'm not happy. Why didn't you give me all the third-party data that I'm entitled to, and all this information that they might think they're entitled to? I'm not happy. I want you to do this. Or they might say, where's all my data? Or why is this missing? I would treat that as a potential. That could be a follow-up. Could be a complaint, but then you need to have a look at the wording. I did try to get, I was using Claude yesterday to do me a complaint, and I was trying to get it to be quite aggressive, but it wasn't. It said it's just not very nice to speak to people that way, and therefore it wouldn't write it. But then I was wondering how we get all these complaints from people which are clearly written by AI. So again, it's wrapped up in lots of different issues. It could be a complaint about your privacy notice. I don't feel that your privacy notice has full details of your processing. It could be about data sharing measures. They could say, I'm not happy that I understand where my data's going, and it could be anything else data related. So I think it really is, the top tip is just to read the correspondence when it comes in. Don't just simply fire it off to a team saying it's a data protection complaint or it's not a complaint, because it will be important for people to understand that. And I think sometimes, having dealt with customer services teams and frontline teams, when they're under pressure and they're dealing with a lot of these, it's very easy to miss something, but it's good to just take a step back, assume good intent, as Stephen Covey said, and then proceed to decide what you do. So what do you do when you already have a complaints process in place? I've called this top tips. I would just say it's just sensible, really. It's just to have a look at your complaints process that you have already. So you might have a customer service process, as Lisa, like she does work with a lot of retail clients, they have that. You might be regulated, so you might have an SRA, you might have an FCA process. It's fine to combine that process in terms of having it in one document. And in fact, having a complaints procedure or complaints process and having each of the different regulators might be quite handy for an individual, and good for you, because when you're doing a review of your complaints procedure and process, you don't have lots of different documents. Now, your standard document might be collective, but then you might have different processes that then fall off the back of that. So it might be a complaint's come in, okay, it's FCA complaint or it's a regulated complaint. There's no impact on data protection, so this team will deal with it. That's fine. And they may have a procedure for dealing with the specific complaint. Or if the complaint comes in, it's very clearly a data protection complaint, it may be that, you know, you have a process for what do you review, who do you speak to, and do that the same way. I would think about, in terms of keeping it simple, can the entry point for your complaints be amended and updated to include the data protection complaints? I would say yes, and it comes on to the next point, providing the current process allows for the time periods and deviations in that process. Because what you don't want to do is go down a process where somebody gets 40 days, for example, to respond, or you don't have to do anything because of this, and then you miss the fact that there's an earlier time period. It's a bit like handling global data breaches, as I'm sure if most of you have worked in organisations, because the GDPR, when the GDPR came in with the 72 hours, that was like quite a stringent time period. So most organisations, if they were handled a breach in like within a week or whatever, they lowered the time period, so it made the time quicker. And then for some of our clients where they had 24 hours notification to other regulators, for example, like the OCC in the US, or because they were regulated and listed, they lowered their process to meet the most stringent requirements. So again, just thinking about that as well. The other thing to think about is like whether or not you can handle the data protection complaint in isolation as well. So something to think about is quite often with these complaints, they will be bundled up with a lot of different, what I would say, noise. And so it makes it quite hard for you to actually see what you need to be handling as well. So just thinking about if you are able to separate them is a really good point to get to. So that is my very short tour of what the 7 chambers do, very briefly, what the complaints process is, and obviously my book recommendation, which is, Stephen Covey's book as well. So I'm now going to hand over to Lisa, and Lisa is going to take over, and she is going to be talking about top tips from working with some of our clients on complaints.
Thank you so much, Jenna. That was really helpful. I'm afraid I don't have a book recommendation, so I'm just going to go straight into complaints. Maybe you might read the ICO guidance on complaints, I don't know, but we're going to go through some practical stuff. Jenai has covered a lot. I'm going to try and give you some practical tips and kind of think, how can we bring what Jenai said into reality? So we're going to go through that, and then, as Jenai's promised, we have got a scenario that we can kind of go through and sort of put everything into practice and see how we get on. So Jenai has mentioned quite a lot, and this is, I think, one of the biggest things is give somebody a simple way and have a think how it works for you that an individual can complain. We tend to find that the majority of people will go directly to the regulator. They're already frustrated. If they can't get through to the right person, that is when they're going to escalate. So really give yourself the best chance. I've worked with a number of clients where, in fact, one said we can't do a postal address as much as it's kind of been recommended because we work in remote offices. And actually, by the time somebody goes in to see the post, it could be 2 weeks already. So again, think about your kind of setup. Everyone sort of thinks about a postal address is a great one. You see it loads of times in privacy notices. So think about the reality. We've also worked with clients where they have a website, and it may say if they have other complaints, so they may be regulated, they may have a section on their website which actually just kind of links into complaints, and you could act like a hyperlink into your data protection complaints. We've done that before, and we've actually told them, which links into what Jenai said, what the different types of complaints are around data protection, so it kind of really focuses them. But the key thing is just make sure there is something really easy, and wherever you're sending them, it is a managed inbox as well, and it's not kind of going to some broken link or to a inbox that people don't tend to manage, because as we've said, we need to kind of act on these quite quickly. So that would be my first thing, is just make sure you really know and stress test how people can have these complaints processes, because we don't want them going to the regulator saying simply they couldn't even get in touch with us. That doesn't look great. We've talked about this. Your first line of defence is always going to be your employees. They need to know exactly what to do when a complaint comes in. They need to understand it's not going to be an ideal situation. Somebody is not going to put in a subject line, I would like to make a data protection complaint. It could be, as you say, bundled into a social media complaint. It could be about something else. It's typically always just one tiny line. So we need to make sure that people aren't getting kind of lost with the noise. They're seeing it, they know what to look for, and they know how to escalate it as well. The majority of times, people who may be working on your front line in your kind of customer service, looking through social media, they just need to say, this is going to be a complaint, I need to know who to escalate it to, or they're not, or I'm not quite sure, so I'm just going to kind of ignore it and deal with the bit that I know how to do. We've done lots of training sessions with our clients as well, and kind of going through and walking through complaints. We're running today for you, so it is quite helpful to understand that. Conduct a simple audit of your documents. You've got hopefully lots of data protection documents and other policies out there. You want to make sure there's kind of that consistent message out to people. So if maybe somebody picks up the data subject rights policy, we've got it linked in that they understand about complaints policies. Your data protection policy tells them if you have a complaints policy, so you may already have a standard complaints policy, really good to add in about your data protection complaints there, and just so people will know where to escalate those complaints. So we kind of recommended simple check, have a look at all your policies, make sure you're up to date and ready for June. You may want to reduce the 30-day deadline to acknowledge a complaint. We know some people, I'm the type of person, if I get 30 days to do something, I will do it on day 29 or 30. So maybe we want to get people in that mindset to do it a bit quicker. 30 days feels such a long time, but in reality, it does go super quick. So you may actually want to say, as your sort of standard, you need to acknowledge within 5 days, so just bring people forward. And as Jenai said, you may have other complaint acknowledgements if you work with different regulators. So you need to make sure that you're doing the lowest one, or you're not confusing people. We're thinking, oh, is it 30 days for a data protection complaint? Is it 15 for this? So give them something really simple and short to work to. Again, to help people, you might want to have a response template. You want to have them quite simple, straightforward, and tailored as well, because again, if someone's made a complaint, the last thing they want to feel is they've had a standard letter just issued out to them. Or we have seen in really bad situations where you've sent a standard template out that actually doesn't even refer to their complaint. It is just so generic. You want them to feel really listened to, on board with your process. So you want that template there for people to be able to use to get kind of the terms right, but you need to really drill into people that this needs to be personalised to them. We're dealing with potentially quite an irate customer, or they're not happy. So we really do want to make sure they feel listened to with our responses. Also, once our complaint's done, as much as we want to breathe a sigh of relief, we're kind of drilling into people and to my clients as well, that this can't always be treated as an isolated issue. It doesn't kind of stop when you send that letter out. We really need to have a look and see, is there a compliance issue? And we're going to talk about that a bit later. Is there a wider issue? Can we learn from this? You know, it's not just one off. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at potentially been a compliance signal, not necessarily a complaint that we come into. So there are kind of top tips and how I've worked with some of my clients and how we'll kind of be implementing as we sort of go down to our deadline of the 19th of June, which is almost 30 days away, which is our deadline to respond and acknowledge. So we're going to go through a scenario, but before we do, I have got a quick poll for everyone. So if we can just pop that up. Okay, so we've just talked about this, but do you think in your organisation, if you had a single complaint, would it trigger a wider review of your privacy processes? Well, excellent that we have. Oh, we're moving. We've changed. We're about 50% of. Oh, no, we're going up again. Let me wait. I'm going to get too excited. We are looking around 58% of you would have a wider review. And we've got about 25 that are unsure. So that's great that we're kind of hopefully moving into that right direction. And after our training session today, we would have 100% that would say a complaint would review a trigger of their processes. So I'm now going to talk through a scenario. This is a real life scenario. As Jenai said, we do work with a lot of retail clients. So this is a real life scenario that we have seen in the past and we've recently worked with, which again reiterates Jen's point that individuals have always been able to complain about data protection. So it's not going to be something new and crazy that people need to think, oh, I'm going to start telling people they can complain. People have always been complaining about data protection, and especially, as Jenai said, with AI, it's getting much easier to complain. So we have received an email that's come into our busy customer service team. Let's say we're in the middle of sales, so we're very, very busy. Lots of things are coming in. Someone has said, I'm still receiving marketing emails from you, even though I opted out months ago and contacted your customer service team 2 weeks ago to tell them that I do not want to receive marketing. Please, can you explain to me why this is happening and stop sending me marketing? I also want to know when I'm going to receive my refund for the order I returned, as I've still not had that refund. And you said the money was going to come into my account by now. Please, can you erase my personal data, as I do not want to shop with you again? So the customer service team, they've kind of seen it, they've added it to the process, they're aware, it's put into the log. How should we handle this? Now, as we said, if we were in a group scenario face to face, we'd all be frantically writing down. I'm going to talk it through, but this will be interesting for you to sort of think, how would you respond to something like this in your organisation? Also, bear in mind, where we can be quite practical, we're going to talk about an ideal situation here. We appreciate that you're dealing with kind of busy times, lots of different people. So we are going to be sort of mindful that some things may change slightly along the way. So the first thing we need to do is, it doesn't matter how busy we are, we've talked about this lots and lots of our kind of key thing. It's come through to your customer service department. It is a angry customer. We need to acknowledge this complaint to them. So again, we're not looking for a full response. We're not looking to resolve it. We are just simply saying, hey, we've heard what you're saying. We understand, we're looking for you. We don't want any proportion, any blame either. You know, you have not unsubscribed correctly, or try and be sort of patronising with them. Just at this point, acknowledge the complaint, make sure they feel listened to. As we've seen there are actually quite a few elements in this complaint. So it isn't just data protection complaints. There's some complaints about the refund and the process. There is also a data subject rights request in there. So this is where our training is really key to our customer service team, because they really need to understand who they're going to engage with. In the scenario that we worked with, customer services came to us as a DPO, and we almost kind of set up a mini complaints team to deal with it. And we worked out who needs to deal with which elements. So, for example, we would go to kind of customer service, they would look at the refund section. We had the element where they hadn't been unsubscribed. So we went to the marketing and the CRM department to double check whether they had or hadn't been unsubscribed. As the DPO, we looked at the kind of complaint aspect and the response, and then looking at actioning their data subject rights. So I think it's key, if you've got multiple teams, that you actually have kind of one person leading the ship. Otherwise, things get forgotten. You need that one person in there coordinating. We've done it before where we've kind of set up a Teams channel or a SharePoint where people can kind of add in their responses as well. So the main person kind of leading it is seeing all the information in real time. It also helps if you start collating stuff in one point. As Jenai mentioned, and we'll talk about earlier, you need to keep all of that information together. So it is great to kind of build it up. So you're kind of working through, you want to look at some of the quick fixes as well. So one of them was he's not happy that he's receiving, was the main thing really, that he's continuing to receive his marketing. Please make sure you stop that. The last thing you want to do, you may not be able to go back and say you've stopped sending marketing. You may want to send it as a collective, but you really do not want the individual, while you're dealing with the complaint, to receive an email notification from you about 20% off the sale as well. So we want to try and taper down what's happening. So look at anything that needs to be done immediately as you're kind of working through your investigation. You might also want to look to delete that individual as well. So look at your kind of quick fixes while you're dealing with the investigation. So we'll assume that we're working in this perfect scenario. Everybody's kind of come in, pulled together, given their information. We've unsubscribed the individual. We've given him the refund. We've kind of dealt with that in isolation. We're now ready to send our response. So we'll look to see what's happened. We'll give him a kind of detailed description, hopefully using our template letter that we've tailored, and we will give a kind of detail of everything we've done, how we've responded and how we've actioned it, our kind of apologies and what we need to do. And maybe at that point acknowledge, which would be good, that we can acknowledge that we have dealt with the deletion request for them. What's very key in our response letters, which is why obviously the template is good, is we need to let them know that they have got the right to respond and escalate to the ICO. So we will send that off. We will hopefully at that point, he will have been unsubscribed for marketing. He's had his refund back and they've been deleted. Let's hope that that's kind of the end of that. But as we've mentioned, we do need to have everything documented, because he may still go to the regulator and complain, as Jenai said, how we haven't handled it. So we want to have all of our information together and ready to be in that good kind of defensible position. The other thing that we want to do, we've talked about this, is it needs to trigger a kind of wider review of our processes. Was it an isolated issue? Was it the fact that the individual just didn't unsubscribe correctly? We did deal with him, but there was some glitch that went through. Or is it a wider issue? We've seen that before. There may have been a glitch in a system, and over a period of time when everyone unsubscribed, it didn't work properly. So we may have others that have still receiving marketing and may complain. So you want to fix that. You want to have a look at your complaints policy. Was it right that it kind of came into customer service? Did they deal with it? What can we learn from? That's why you have your complaints logs as well, because if you were to see a number of complaints related to marketing issues and unsubscribed, you may want to kind of look and do some training for your teams. So hopefully then you've got all your lessons learned, you've got your documentation. The customer is now semi-happy because he has his refund and he's not receiving his marketing, and we can move on and continue to work with our customers and be assured that we're not going to get this complaint again, because we have reviewed everything and we are ready to go. And that is how you deal with a complaint in a very short and simple stop. But we do appreciate you are going to have human beings as well, so there will be some anomalies, I'm sure, that come through.
So, and I think from that scenario, actually, Lisa, it's quite interesting the amount of people that are then involved in a complaint, because you have something come in. So you've already got the marketing team, they're investigating. You've then got the data team. You've then got, the data protection team will probably then, handling the right to erasure, which might not just be for deleting my data. It might go wider than the marketing update. You've then got the DSAR going on at the same time. And I think something that we have seen certainly is that these issues do become really muddied very quickly. And then when you have responses from individuals, it does feel like sometimes that they then do add on top of it additional like issues that you're trying to handle. So each time you correspond with an individual, the situation does get worse. I would say as well, it is worthwhile just being aware that at a certain point you can make a commercial decision as to whether or not you continue to engage with these individuals. So I think from a data protection point of view, it's certainly, have you exhausted, everything? Have you dealt with their queries? Are you able to give anything else? And I think if you get to the point where you're saying, like, we have done enough, then I would say there's no need to continuously keep corresponding with the individual, because I think at a certain point you just have to say, it is not reasonable. And obviously, as you are aware with data subject access request, you do have this manifestly unfounded. So once you've responded to a request, if somebody continues to ask, obviously you need to do a full assessment. So I would say from a complaints point of view, it is just knowing when you get to that point that you are happy. Could you stand up in front of the ICO and say, we did everything that we could, there was nothing more to give, to be able to say that, but there's nothing stopping you from, you don't have to keep continuing these conversations with individuals, because a lot of the complaints that we deal aren't quick ones where it's knocked out of marketing. It's wider and it goes on. And then, it is something it's important that people have the right to complain, but it's also the right to remember that right is, subject to reasonableness from that point of view. So because we don't have long left, should we move on to the QA? So if anybody has any questions, and then I'll do the last couple of slides at the end, and then we will come out with another date for doing an update on the digital omnibus, because I think it is worthy of just a little conversation. So does anybody have any questions relating to complaints that they'd like to mention or like to go through? So I see that there was one about handling individuals who've got significant mental health challenges. I think from that point of view with individuals, it is obviously, I think it is quite clear when somebody is not able to articulate what they need. However, I think it's then more important when you get an original request in that you are very clear and very transparent, and you write your responses to those individuals in a very simple way so they can understand it. So again, not being legalistic, which is why which is how we would probably say to handle any complaints. Just being very direct and responding to the complaint in question. Now, obviously, if somebody is suffering from some form of, mental health challenge, or they may be, extremely distressed, I think it's always good to, again, just make sure that you are handling it in the most sympathetic manner whilst you're going through. But obviously, you don't have any obligations further than just making sure you're responding in a very clear and transparent manner. Your responses are, as full and as up to date as they can be. But beyond that, I'm not entirely sure from a data protection point of view that you necessarily have to do anything else. I think from a strategy point of view, I think I would just make sure that you do go through the letters, you are responding. And if you do decide at a point in time that there is nothing more you can do, then whoever's making that decision is just maybe, I say document, but I'd be very careful about documenting decisions which are unfounded about an individual, because if they have the right of data subject access. So I would just make sure that it is escalated appropriately internally and a decision made as to how you handle this as well. Does anybody else have any questions on complaints or anything else they would like to know before we go through to the last couple of slides? No? Okay, so we will do a digital omnibus update, just updates as well. So we've got a YouTube channel, we've got our DPO digest. With that, I know that when we do the DPO digest, these are the kind of things that we go through, and we will be doing like an end of a year roundup. So you'll probably see some of these, the guidance that's come out, and maybe our top 5 tips on it, just something simple. But again, feedback, if there's anything more you'd like to see, let us know and we'll do the best that we can. And then our next webinar is the 15th of September, and it's to do with managing your supply chain, so processors and controllers. And it's also looking at it from a processor point of view in terms of what do you have to do, but also from a controller point of view as well. So it's going to be very practical again. And as I said before, if you would like to hear anything else from us or have any tips for improvement, then please do get in touch, because it's always nice to hear from you, even if it's not in the context of a complaint. We're always happy to hear from you any point, or a DSAR, that is as well. Okay, so I think that's the end of the webinar. So thank you very much for attending. Claire, we can stop the recording now, and yeah, have a great day. Thanks, everybody.